Dr. Jazz.
I'm in
Are you in New
Slovenia.
York?
No, Slovenia, Europe.
Oh, Slovenia. How is Slovenia?
Former Yugoslavia, kind of. Well, we're good, you know. It's
Good.
small country, 2 million people, so
I played at a ski resort in Slovenia.
oh, no, not Cerkna. Where did you play?
I also played at a jazz festival there, the Bratislava.
Oh, that's Slovakia. Slovakia, I mean. Yeah.
Oh, Slovakia. Okay.
Yeah. But maybe you played, I think you must have played like in the 80s in former Yugoslavia, probably, like in Ljubljana.
I
I'm like
played in Zagreb.
Zagreb. Okay, that's Croatia. Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Ah,
Actually, one
beautiful.
of the most memorable concerts I've ever done with the Pat Metheny Group.
Really?
Yeah, it was great.
Wow, amazing. Yeah. But Mark, thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I just went through all the albums. I like really love CDs, so still. And I have you like on,
Oh,
you know,
no.
I don't even fit in in the screen, but and you know, I've always liked your work as a band leader as well, and you know, Colette with Danny and other stuff you've done. But I mean, I know you talked about the new album already. It's still on other platforms, but like for our audience, Cross Currents is the new one. And can you tell me behind the story behind it, especially your connection with these musicians, and how come you decided to do this project? I mean, what's the story behind it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The new record is called, it's my name, Mark Egan, Cross Currents, and it's just going to be out March 8th. It's just coming out in about a week or so, even though it is out in most digital formats now. You can listen to it, but
Yeah.
officially the
Uh-huh.
CDs are released on. But I started work on this about 9 months ago, and I've been good friends with Sean Pelton, the drummer, for many, many years, as well as Shane Theriot, the guitar player, since 2014. I've known him, Shane. And for this record, I wanted to do another trio record with guitar, and I wanted to do more of a R&B
Yeah.
jazz rock type of a feel with this. So I started writing for it, and um, first started out with one of the songs, the last song actually, which is called Eastern Blue. And then I was doing other songs, and I also asked the other guys in the band, Shane and Sean, to contribute songs, which they did. And I, in some ways, wrote around some of the songs that they sent me. And then I came up with my own songs. So I wrote, I think six or seven of the songs are my originals. And Shane wrote three songs, and Sean wrote one song. And
Good.
we co-wrote a song, Shane and I together. But, you know, I had played actually right before the COVID shutdown with Shane and Sean with a poet named Frank Messina, and we played in New York City. And I remember from that gig, at one point in the night, it was just trio, just, you know, guitar, bass, and drums. And I said, "Ooh, I want to do something with this because it felt so good."
Ah,
So
beautiful.
that was sort of the initial thought of it for me, you know, that I wanted to do that.
Mm.
And so I spent a lot of time pre-production getting it ready, and we recorded it in Connecticut this past summer in 2023,
Yeah.
going into 24. So yeah, we recorded 11 songs in 3 days.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's such a nice record. I mean, the sound and the tunes, like, yeah, it's. I hope you bring this band to Europe. Hopefully, would be cool to see you
I'd
band
love to.
leading in Europe.
I'd love to play this for the European audience. I think they'd really like it.
Yeah, it's such a nice open record. I mean, uh, you said you were composing, and I wanted to ask you about your composing. What's your process there? I mean, I have a CD. I think yeah, Mosaic is it like the one with remembering and ocean views, those tunes that you've written back then, and all that they have such nice melodies.
Yes.
And uh, what's your process when writing? Do you write on piano? I mean, I see the keyboard behind you on bass, or like where do you start usually?
I write in different ways, different formats. Sometimes, a lot of times, the first thing in the morning when I get up and I'm practicing right after I have, breakfast, coffee, whatever, I'll come in my studio and just start to play, just to improvise on my bass, for instance. And a lot of times I'll come up with an idea and I'll say, oh, let me record that. And I have a little, in my iPhone, I have a little voice memo thing. So I go into that and I'll play that line and I'll say, in the voice memo, I'll just say, this is this BPM with this type of groove behind it. I just try to talk about as much about the song as I can. And then I come back to it. And during the shutdown, the COVID shutdown of everything, I was home a lot. Obviously, everybody was home. And I did about 650 of these little ideas in the thing. And so when I was getting ready to do this record, I went back and I listened to things and I had a piece of paper and I wrote down, the ones that I thought that I could start to work with. So that's one way. It's just it comes from a bass line. And then other times on the bass, I'll play a melody. Sometimes on guitar, even though I'm not a guitar player, I can play chords and play melodies. And I'll come up with something that, because I had, let's say, a delay and a nice little overdrive on the guitar, it's a sound that I wouldn't have gotten on the bass. So it inspires me to write something around that. That's another way. And then on keyboard, sometimes I'll just be playing piano a little bit and come up with a certain chord progression. And then I'll say, I like that. And then I'll write a melody on it. And then sometimes, especially for this record, during the COVID shutdown, I set up on my computer a lot of loops that I could use in my Pro Tools writing. So I did a lot of things where I'd find a good groove and I'd loop that, and then I would play along with it with my bass or guitar and come up with a feel. And so that's how it is. And then one of the songs on the new record is called Pocket Call. And I wrote that. It was just a bass line. I have a Steinberger upright bass. You can't see it here, but and I wrote. Just one morning I went up and I just played do 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 do, and so that became. I said, oh, I like that groove. Sean will play great over that. And Shane, the guitar player, is from New Orleans, and it's a very type of song. It was sort of like the Meters, Sissy.
I love that.
If you listen to it, it's a lot like Sissy Strut, but it's different. So I wanted to do this record that showed off my R&B and my sort of folk roots, even though, as a bass player, I've gone more into the jazz direction of playing melodically and soloing and everything on it. But I wanted to really focus on that as sort of like the basis. And then I do a lot of fretless work on top of it.
Is that how it started, actually? Like, I don't know, late 60s, I don't know, those R&B guys that you heard, or what was the reason that you started playing bass, actually? I mean, was there a moment you said like, oh man, I want to do that? Or
yeah, there was one moment, and it was when I went to see the Supremes, the
really?
Motown group, the Supremes.
Wow.
I saw them in my hometown in Massachusetts, Brockton, Mass. And they played at a state fair, which is, a fair where they have a Ferris wheel and rides and everything. And I was a trumpet player originally, and I was a professional trumpet player since I was 15. And when I was about 16, I saw the Supremes, and it wasn't James Jamerson playing bass, but it was someone from Motown. And I stood in front of the stage. I went right up by the bass player, and I was just, I couldn't believe it. I was just attracted to it. And, during that time, this is like the late 60s, mid to late 60s. A lot of the music on the radio was Motown music, and it was also Jimi Hendrix and Cream and the Doors and the Beatles. And for some reason, even though I was a trumpet player, I focused on the bass lines. So something inside me, was saying bass, bass, bass.
Interesting. You think
it's hard to describe how you're attracted to things, but
exactly,
and instruments. What were you going to say?
What about jazz? I mean, what got you inspired to investigate the jazz then on bass?
Yes, I was so enamored. I was so interested in bass that I looked in the newspaper and the wanted ads, and I found a used bass. It was a Del Rey bass, electric bass, and I got a bass, and I got a Supro bass amp, which is actually a really nice amp. It was a tube amp and really really had a fat sound. And right next to where my trumpet teacher, I was taking trumpet lessons, there was a guitar teacher there. So I took some lessons with his guitar teacher on bass. And he took me right to what I needed to know as far as, you know, I played it more like a guitar where, you know, one finger per fret wherever I could. And he taught me how to play scales all over the neck in different positions and sort of the function of outlining a triad or a chord. So you know, at a very early on in my career with bass, he directed me right to it. So I was lucky to have a good teacher like that.
So that makes sense because this and trumpet playing led to your melodicism, right? Kind of, I mean, because you know, when people think of the fretless, obviously, you know, Jaco is like there, but when I first heard you, I was like, man, what is this sound to you? You didn't sound like Jaco at all. It was fretless, obviously. You at least how I hear you know, the early Pat Metheny stuff and even the earlier, you know, I think Sanborn records and
yeah.
It's like it's you know, you immediately had your own voice. How did you develop that? Like
Well, you know, it's interesting because trumpet, before I played bass, I was a trumpet player. And so the trumpet is it's melodic. It's one note at a time.
Yeah.
And it's more in a upper harmonic range of the sonic spectrum. Bass, of course, is lower, and especially fretless bass is more like a cello in a way. And when I was at the University of Miami studying music, I was a trumpet player studying trumpet. But I started to play bass and I transferred all my knowledge from trumpet over to bass. So a lot of that melodicness went over to there, but I also realized that, you know, I wanted to play bass, so I had to get the functionality of playing a groove together. So I also not only brought that melodicism to the bass, but I really worked on playing as a bass player and listening to bass players and laying down the groove, because that was more important than at the time. But I think just my head is just more of a melodic place. And I never wanted to sound like Jaco, you know, exactly like Jaco. I never, whenever I transcribed Teen Town when it first came out, and that's just a fast bass line.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, no idea.
You don't really hear the Jaco, you know, it's melodic, but it's more when you hear Jaco play a melody like a remark you made or something,
Yeah,
you know, report. But with the Pat Metheny Group, we were really trying to sound differently than other bands. So I was very, very aware not to sound like Jaco. And, you know, when I joined the band, Pat had just recorded, he had recorded Bright Side's Life with
yeah,
Jaco.
exactly. Yeah.
And then he had recorded Watercolors with Eberhard Weber,
Exactly,
you know,
yeah.
which is
Another monster. Yeah.
also one of my favorite bass players, and another very beautifully melodic bass player. And I didn't want to sound like him, but I love Eberhard. I love everything about his music, his playing, his compositions, his orchestration. So, you know, I followed in the footsteps of Jaco, where when we first played with the Pat Metheny Group, we were playing music from Bright Side's Life, but
really?
I didn't want to sound like Jaco. So, you know, it was a very, very conscious effort to not try to do it. And Pat didn't want to set me to sound like Jaco.
Of
You know, he
course,
just wanted me to sound like I wanted to. You know?
Yeah, but you had a relationship with Jaco as well, right? I mean, you studied with him, or like, what was your story with him? I mean, how did that begin?
I studied music at the University of Miami.
Yeah.
And Jaco lived in Oakland Park, which is up near Fort Lauderdale, which is about 45 minutes away. So I wasn't around Jaco for 4 years when I was first there, and I started hearing about this bass player, Jaco. And he was playing with this guy named Ira Sullivan, who's a multi-instrumentalist. And he had a band with him, and I played with Ira Sullivan's other band. I was playing acoustic bass with him, and Ira kept saying, "You got to hear this bass player, Jaco, this electric player. He's a monster." And so finally we met, and we became friends, and we actually played in a big band together with two basses.
Oh man!
Not at the same time, different times.
Okay.
He brought in his charts of Domingo, excuse me, and he charts that he had with Wayne Cochran and the CC Riders. And then Jaco one summer was teaching at the university as adjunct faculty during the summertime, and I did take some lessons with him over the summer, but that was all I was doing with him. And I would go see him play a lot, and it was amazing because Jaco was an innovator, and it was very amazing to be around in live situations to watch an innovator. It would be like seeing Charlie Parker or something. It's just very, very special, and he blew it wide open. When you listen to bass now, most bass that I hear is somehow influenced by Jaco, other than people before like Chuck Rainey and James Jamerson. Yeah. But I did know Jaco. We had a very great relationship, and later on, when the Pat Metheny Group started to become popular, we used to open up for Weather Report. So it would be the Pat Metheny Group, and we would play before Weather Report, and talk about pressure, to go out into a huge audience and play with the Pat Metheny Group, and then have Jaco come on was really a special experience, and very inspiring, as a bass player, knowing that there's a lot of people listening to you.
Yeah, but still, like two really complete voices, like you said, you didn't want to sound like him, and you actually don't. You didn't. I've never really. It's the same instrument, but you're really have
But
your
Sam,
own unique personality always. I mean, like ever.
And a lot of that I sort of it's a similar analogy to the way that people speak in their voice, the way they talk. It's the same. Now, someone could talk like Jaco, man, I'm the best in the world. Jaco would say these things, but when I listen to fretless players, I definitely hear people that are really Jaco clones, the way that they play a vibrato and they approach it from above or below. And, I say to myself, why do that? Jaco's done that. The fretless bass is such a beautiful instrument, and it's so expressive, and it's wide open to interpretation, so that's the way that I approached it. I wanted to make it sound my own and differently. And
yeah, definitely you did. Well, how did you mentioned Pat and the Pat Metheny Group, and I wanted to ask you about your connection with Danny, especially Gottlieb in that band, and because that's for me. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge fan of those early records, and one of the reasons why so many of players of my generation started to play, jazz, because it was easy accessible. And how did that group progress, and especially your story with Danny? I mean, as a rhythm section for Pat, like how much did you guys talk, what to do, or how did the music progress?
Well, Danny and I went to the university also. He was there when I was there. Pat was at the university as well. And there were a lot of great musicians there that went on to do a lot of things. Hiram Bullock was there, Clifford Carter, Steve Morse was there.
Really?
So I played a lot with Danny in the big band at the university. So we had played together before Pat Metheny. We played a lot of gigs together. We were on the road a little bit with different people. And so when it came time to play with Pat Metheny, when he asked us all to join, Danny and I we were already very good friends. We had played together in quite a few circumstances. But it was with Pat that we really, because we toured all the time, about 300 days a year for 4 years. That's incredible amount of concerts every night. You're just playing, and you really learn the players, how they play in the band, and especially a bass and drum relationship, how you fit in with each other and how you play with each other. And I remember many times for the first couple of years, we drove in a van everywhere, and Danny and I, we take turns driving, but it was a van, and we'd have the equipment in the back, and then a big piece of foam, thick foam, across the equipment, and there was a space where two people could get up on top of that and sleep. I mean, there was only this much space. But we would Danny and I would listen with headphones, and we would, I was very influenced by Miles Davis and records like Bitches Brew and a lot of Afro-Cuban music. So while we would be riding in the van and, on these long distances, Danny and I would be listening to some wild stuff like Miles at the Fillmore. And so we were trying to expand it in that way, even though the music of the Pat Metheny Group was nothing like that in a way. It was much more controlled and sort of Americana jazz with a different type of orchestration, with Lyle and Pat's guitar, and the sound was very different and very focused in so many ways. But Danny and I experimented a lot, and we, that led to actually us starting the group Elements. When I left the Pat Metheny, Danny and I later, right after that, started the group Elements, which was basically the basis of that was from our playing as a duo. And we spent a lot of time when we would travel with Pat back and forth from Japan. We played Japan many times. We'd always stop in Hawaii and visit our friends over there. We would play in our friend's living room, which is right on the beach, and we'd play to the waves. And we just had a lot of rapport just playing duo. And something always happened when we played duo. It was always very musical, and we know each other's playing so well that something always comes of it. And we later went on to play with the Gil Evans Orchestra. Sweet Basil, where you have that sign in the back. And we played with Gil.
86, right? The record.
Yes. I was with Gil since 83. And so Danny and I, that was a great stage of development for us, because with the Gil Evans Orchestra, it was a semi-big band with guitar, Hiram Bullock, and many different players, New York session players, and just incredible players, incredible musicians. And as a rhythm section with that group, sometimes there would be 4 or 5 solos in one song. We might play the Hendrix song Up From the Skies, and there would be 4 or 5 different solos. And so imagine the rhythm section has to develop a soloist, you begin and you sort of bring it down, and then you're developing with them and working with them. And then gradually, whatever the direction of the solo goes, you peak, and then all of a sudden there's a new soloist. And you have to take it to a different place. So we would change it up. We'd go into a reggae feel. We'd go into 5/4. We'd go into a 7/4. And we could do that just by looking at each other. We would, I would just, if I went like this, 5, we'd be in 5. Or if I went like that or something to Danny, that means halftime. So, we would come from this doom, 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 chaps, doom, down, down, doom, doom, down, and then I'd go, we go boom, doom, So we came up with all these variations, and it was all for the soloists and for the development of it. And I think that's one of the things that Gil Evans appreciated about us, is that we took direction and changed things up and did it in a very compositional way. So all of that, to sort of answer your question about Danny and I playing together, all of those experiences came together in the way that we play and are part of our experiences, so much so that in 2020 we released a duo record called
I know. It's beautiful. And
that was something we wanted to document about our duo playing, and I think it captures that. Something that we wanted to do as a legacy thing, just to have it in the can and released to everybody.
Yeah, no, it's special. I mean, you guys been playing together, what, almost 50 years now, right? I mean,
yeah, it's about 52 years. I was just
incredible. That's incredible.
A long time.
That's a long time, yeah.
And we're going to be playing this summer in Europe. We're going to play in Perugia, Italy, with a tribute to the Gil Evans.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
With the band, with the direction of Pete Levin, keyboardist Pete Levin.
Wow.
So we're looking forward to that. It's going to be happening in July 15th. We're also playing Lugano, Switzerland.
Shit, too far. That's the only 2 gigs?
Those are the only 2 gigs at this point.
Damn. Okay. How was Gil like, by the way? I mean, you mentioned Gil, working with him. What was your experience?
With Gil Evans?
Yeah.
Oh, it was the dream of my life come true to play with Gil, because as I mentioned earlier, I've been a big fan of Miles Davis since I first started listening to him. And, Gil Evans was Miles Davis's mentor. So when I came to New York, I never played with Miles, but Miles knew of me through Gil. And so playing with Gil Evans was the closest to play with Miles Davis as I could get. And I'm just so fortunate because I felt like everything that I ever did musically led to playing with Gil Evans, because he influenced so many musicians, not only with the records like of Sketches of Spain and all of Gil's own records, but I realized that Gil was at most of Miles Davis's recording sessions as a sort of an associate producer in the background. Miles wanted him there for his direction. So like sometimes you hear these outtakes of all the Miles Davis records, and in the background you can hear, Miles say, "What do you think of that, Gil?" Or Gil will say something. So a lot of it, Gil was a major part of Miles I would say, especially like In a Silent Way,
Yeah.
Bitches Brew, Live Evil, all those records, or Fields to Kilimanjaro. Some of those songs are Gil Evans compositions that Miles has the credit for, but Gil, I think, wrote a lot of those, and I don't know exactly what happened, but it was great playing with Gil. I played with him later on in his life. He was 72, 73, 74, 75 when I played with him. So it was later on in his life, and the band was more of a free band rather than everything being played as composed and playing just the notes on the chart. A lot of what we played were lead sheets. If people know what a lead sheet is, just the melody and the chords. And some of them were actual arrangements, but then it would go off and just go wherever it could go. It would play free. It did not necessarily stay with the form of what it was. Other things would stay very much to the form. He wrote a great arrangement for Goodbye Pork Pie Hat, the Charles Mingus song.
Mingus, yeah.
Yeah, and he did a great arrangement, which we played that as it's written, but then it opened up. And I was fortunate. I was able to play at the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina. And we performed the music of Sketches of Spain. So that, how heavy is that? It was just incredible. So I actually took some lessons with Gil, some composition lessons.
Really?
And
Oh man, beautiful.
And I wrote 2 arrangements for the Gil Evans Orchestra that we recorded and are on record, and one of them won a Grammy, actually, on the record that won a Grammy. So I was really fortunate to be in Gil's presence, and I learned so much about being with him and about the camaraderie of the band. I mean, Lou Soloff was a part of that band.
Man. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Lou, have you interviewed Lou?
Oh man, I have all of his records, I think. Yeah. He's one of the most underrated players on the trumpet, I think. It's like, yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
And Hiram was there, right, on guitar, and
Hiram was there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Pete Levin, and of course Danny Gottlieb. Sometimes percussion would be there.
Amazing.
I think it was usually 3 trumpets, 2 trombones, 3 saxophones, sometimes tuba. It was a big band.
Yeah.
On a tiny stage at Sweet Basil, tiny little stage. It was the size of a postage stamp, and we had so much fun. And we toured, and we toured a double billing with Miles Davis. It was Miles Davis and Gil Evans. We opened for Miles Davis. We did a Japan tour, and we did a few tours in Europe doing that. So, that was, I'm just so lucky to have been in Gil's presence, I'm really, really.
Yeah, one of the greatest, definitely. Yeah.
Yes.
When did you move to New York, by the way? When was that after Miami?
I moved in 1976.
Okay. Because I mean, I have some records with you on like Jackie McLean and Dave Sanborn and stuff. You were really active. Like, how did all those associations begin to happen for you in New York in the late 70s?
Yes, I moved to New York with a singer named Phyllis Hyman, who is a singer that we played in a band in Florida. We got asked to play in New York for 2 weeks. Hiram Bullock was in that band, and Clifford Carter played keyboard, and a great drummer named Bill Bowker, who is a drummer that I played with mostly in Miami when I was down there, more so than I did with Danny. And we had a great hookup as a rhythm section. we came to New York with Phyllis, and we got asked to play steady at this club in New York called Russ Brown's. And so all of a sudden I was in New York. I still had an apartment in Miami, but I went down we had a day off. I drove down straight through 24 hours,
Oh,
closed my apartment, and drove straight back in 2 days. But that gig we played at in New York, everyone came to hear us play. The Brecker brothers came, Dave Sanborn, George Benson,
ooh,
Steve Wonder, George Harrison, because it was a different sounding band. Phyllis was a really great singer. And it was like I said, it was a different sounding band for New York. It wasn't the usual, like Stuff was big
yeah,
then in New York. And
yeah.
there was a lot of fusion at that time. But we were playing songs from Return to Forever, Light as a Feather. We were and doing all kinds of like Spain and just playing funk and different things. So we weren't New Yorkized. We were sort of innocent. But through that, we met a lot of people. And after a month, I got a call, and the keyboard player and I got a call to play with the Pointer Sisters. So I went on the road with the Pointer Sisters, and
Wow.
then
Okay.
Hiram got a call to play with David Sanborn, and then things started happening, and we were in New York. And then when I got back off the road with the Pointer Sisters, I played with Diodato, who's a keyboard player, arranger, very famous. I don't know if you know her, Diodato.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that hit 2001. And when I came back from playing with him, I started, David Sanborn needed a bass player because Herb Bushler, the bass player, was leaving the band, and Hiram Bullock recommended me. I had been jamming with Victor Lewis and Hiram at these loft sessions in New York.
Oh man. Okay. Wow.
We used to get together, Bill Evans, a saxophone player, Steve Grossman, all different drummers used to come by. And so anyway, that's how I first started to play with David Sanborn. I joined the David Sanborn band, which was in New York. That's a big thing because if you played with David Sanborn, you started getting called for a lot of studio work. So I was starting to do a lot of studio work in New York, and we recorded a record called Promise Me the Moon,
Yeah.
which David asked all of us if we had any songs. So I wrote a song for that record called Heart Lake. It was the first song I ever wrote, and it was recorded on Warner Brothers. It was a big deal.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I was playing with David Sanborn, and that's how that happened. And then when I was out with David Sanborn, I got a call from Pat Metheny, and he was starting the first Pat Metheny Group. And I said, well, I'm playing with David Sanborn, and he said, well, why don't you come to Boston and, just rehearse, play with us for a while. And so I did. I went up there, and I realized that, wow, this is why I want to play music. Not that I didn't love David Sanborn and playing with that band and being a part of New York, but I felt that there was something really special about Lyle and Pat and Danny. And so I remember calling David. I said, David, I'm leaving to go with the Pat Metheny Group. He goes, who's that? Pat
Yeah,
wasn't known.
exactly.
He had done
Sure. Yeah.
he had done Bite Size Life. He had done Watercolors, and he was known amongst jazz guitar players. He was starting to be known through the ECM record label, but on the mainstream, he wasn't known. But I just said, I got to do this. He goes, well, I understand. And it was a very difficult decision for me because I realized how tough it was to break into New York. And by playing with David Sanborn, I broke in, and I was doing record dates all the time, doing commercials, movies.
Yeah.
I was very busy, but I left it all to go with Pat Metheny, and we were doing $50 a gig nights. We were playing little clubs. It wasn't like we went to concert halls. We started from the very beginning, and we got in a van. Pat's father owned a Dodge dealership. I think it was Dodge, and Pat bought a van, and we just hit the road, and we hit 300 days a year and just kept going. And then the good thing was that Pat had a great agent, Ted Kurland Associates, who at the time took Gary Burton and Keith Jarrett and a lot of other ECM artists. So Pat was getting booked, and we started to get better venues. We started playing sometimes in college venues and better clubs, and it just kept going and going until finally we recorded that first record which is called the Pat Metheny Group White Album.
Yeah.
And that took off. That was a huge record all over the world. It was very popular. So that was how it started, and went from Sanborn playing with them to Pat.
Amazing. How did you stay fresh those 300 gigs? You as a bass player, I mean, or you guys as a group, like that you playing so many gigs to reinvent yourself to.
Samo, it's interesting because I was talking to someone who was documenting Pat Metheny, the Pat Metheny Group, and he sent me an itinerary of all the gigs we ever did. I don't know, he got it from someone in the fan club somehow. Not only is it that, but it has the set list from every gig.
Oh.
And we pretty much played the same set.
Shit, man, that's
I mean, it changed as different compositions were composed and arranged. And it started out with more of the Bright Side's Life, Watercolors records, but towards the middle of my time with it, the set list pretty much stayed the same all the time. So how do you stay fresh?
Wow.
We really focused on the sound of the group and just tried to play it better and better every night. And, we would have band meetings every night. It wasn't like we just played it and then just went to a club or something or just hung out. At the end of the gig, we would talk. Pat would say, well, this was good here. Let's try this here. Or Lau would say that, or, or Danny and I would say, well, why don't we do this groove here? And so we were constantly trying to make it better. And the nature of the sound of that group had a very open sound, and it had a very fresh sound. If you just heard the band for the first time, you'd probably say, wow, this is different. It definitely has a lot of influences from jazz and rock and folky stuff, but it's different. It's not the usual fusion that's happening. And we purposely put it in that direction as a different sound. Pat did, and Lyle and Danny and I. So at times it was very challenging to keep it fresh when we would do 21 straight one-nighters in different cities every day, where I would not know, I forget where we were, but I know that the main thing I looked forward to was playing the music, and luckily, I will say that on the time off that we were off, I still had an apartment in New York, and I did a lot of recordings with other people during the Pat Metheny Group touring days.
That's insane.
And I would call contractors, which I had known before I went out with Pat. And when I knew that I was going to be in town for a couple of weeks, I would call them and say, I'm available for this. And I knew contractors and producers. So when I went back, I did records with Steve Grossman. I did records with Sonny Corcoran, and all those records
Jackie
happened.
McLean, right? Even I think I have.
Jackie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jackie. Yeah. So it was during that time period, there was a lot of music happening in New York and a lot of record dates and a lot of venues to play. So, and sometimes, as far as how do we keep it fresh, sometimes it would seem like, oh God, we're playing the same thing again, but somehow we were able to keep it fresh, And I've always enjoyed playing a lot of different styles of music. So whenever I was off, I was playing fusion, and I was playing with all different types of, complete space, playing loft sessions where it's completely improvised, or playing sessions where it's just grooves. So, I had a balance. It's kind of a strange balance, but I always enjoyed playing different styles. So that's helped balance it out.
Yeah. No, I just asked because I had a year and a half ago my longest tour, which compared to is nothing, but it was 17 one-nighters with Bob Moses on drums and Ariel Anderson on bass. And on gig 10, I was like,
wow.
My idea was those guys played amazing, right? And after 10 gigs, I was starting to wonder, me personally, that I'm questioning my language, how I play, and that I sound the same, that I always keep repeating myself. I probably wasn't, but psychologically, I guess that's why I wanted to ask you, psychologically, I was like, shit, it's the same what I play every night. It's heavy. I imagine only 300 gigs, that's.
Yeah, but I can relate to exactly what you said. I would feel the same way, like just questioning, is this right? But I did practice a lot on the road when I had
Mm,
any spare time. I was always sort of shedding and trying to play melodies a little bit different way and trying to stay, the music was for us was technical enough that just to play it
yeah,
kept you in shape. But it was more than being in shape. It was more mentally about coming up with different ideas
yeah,
soloistically. But that's
yeah.
what a great band with Harold Anderson and Bob Moses.
I'll send you a link. Yeah, we had like a 3 week tour. It was amazing, man. Ariel, like on the bass, he's still, oh man, 81 and sound. We have a tour now in May also, and with Ariel, and he's
Oh,
so good,
fantastic.
man. Yeah,
Please say hello for
I
me.
will. I
And,
will definitely.
Bob, I remember we played opposite Harold in Copenhagen.
Wow.
I forget the name of the club, but I remember hanging out with him and it was great. He's such a great musician, great bass player. Yeah.
Yeah, such a nice guy as well. I mean, it's
Yes.
such a privilege. Like I remember the gigs that we did, and we played the head, and I leave those two guys playing as a duo, and I just have my eyes
I
closed, and I'm like,
yeah.
shit, man, I should slowly kind of go in, with something because, but they sounded so well. I was like, I would spoil it, But I mean, eventually I did, but it just, it's like you and Danny listening to you two guys. Like you could be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, speaking of Bob Moses, I did a gig once at the Montreal Jazz Festival with Moses, Bobby McFerrin,
Whoa,
and Dave Friedman, or was it Dave Samuels on vibes? Completely free, no music.
really? Wow.
A big festival, and we played, and before we played, I was thinking to myself, wow, there's no tunes, but it was okay because Bob Moses is such a
Oh,
creative
he's
drummer
incredible.
and
He's incredible.
such a great person and musical spirit.
Yeah,
And Bobby McFerrin is just he's so creative. So it worked out great. It came out great.
amazing. Yeah, wow. Yeah. Now, Mark, I also wanted to ask you since I have you here, like you've played with so many guitarists, and but one of my favorites always has been John Abercrombie, and I wanted to ask you your relationship with John. Like, how when did you guys first play together? And as we speak, for me, still, it's such a beautiful record. And what was your story with John? I mean,
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I I met John when we were with the Pat Metheny Group because uh we had a co-billing. We played in Japan with the John Abercrombie Quartet
with Richie
and
and those guys, yeah,
with George Mraz and Richie
Byrick, yeah,
Byrak and Peter.
Donald, yeah, on drums, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly.
Wow, that was so great playing opposite them. So that's when I first met John. And then when I went back to New York, I played with John there was a jazz festival in New York City at, I forget what the club was, but it was called the Guitar Summit. And I got to play with John there. And I always loved John Abercrombie, all his music on ECM. I love Gateway
Oh,
with Dave Holland and Jack DeJohnette.
the
And
best, yeah.
Abercrombie's been one of my favorite guitar players ever. And when I was getting ready to do a trio record in 2007, 6 and 7, I wanted to do a trio record with Danny and John. And I started writing for that. We did some
Mm,
standards on that and originals and some free playing. And that's a double CD set that's out.
yeah.
It's called As We Speak. And John is just so musical and he was so highly evolved as a guitar player and I say he passed away, but
The music is here, yeah.
his music lives and incredible musician. And with Danny and him and we didn't have to talk about anything. It was just basically, if there was a form for a song, we would talk about the form. And I had sent John um, my compositions that we recorded on that record. He came very well prepared, and I had a studio at my house, and we recorded at my studio. Great guitar player Jeff Champa engineered it,
Mhm.
and we recorded for 2 or 3 days. and that's what came of that. There was so much music that I wanted to put out a double CD of that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was really special. I did a couple tours with John in
Oh, you
Europe
did?
with the, yes, we
Wow.
did a tour in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, I think, with Danny. And then we did another one with Anthony Pinchetti
Mhm.
as a trio with John. So we did 2 tours
Wow.
with that. And it was great to play that music live. It was really fun. We did one of the gateway songs on that. I always wanted to do one.
Oh man, yeah.
And we did How Deep Is the Ocean? John always loved playing that standard. And you know, he could just take chorus after chorus and harmonically just, you know, twist it, and his phrase, you know, as a guitar player, his phrasing and was just so came from the evolution of jazz guitar, from Jim Hall
Yeah.
and Charlie Christian. You know, he really is an extension of that, of the lineage of jazz guitar. He's a very important player. I also got to play with Larry Coryell, which is
Oh,
Larry is very.
what was that?
I played
Didn't know that.
in
Shit.
Larry's band from 2002 until 2008. We toured all over the world with Paul
Or
Wertico.
Vertigo, yeah, of course. Yeah, Paul told me about it. Yeah. Shit, yeah,
Paul
I forgot.
Wertico
Yeah,
and Larry and myself, and
exactly.
we played everywhere, all
The
over.
Power Trio, yeah. It was something like that called, right?
Yeah, Japan, and
Yeah.
we played in Russia with him also. And Larry was another one. He's one of the forefathers of jazz, modern jazz guitar,
Fusion,
right?
yeah.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
you say?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You
Amazing.
know, the sus 11 chord, you know,
Yeah, exactly.
early on. And so, you know, I've been really fortunate to play with great guitar players. You know, I've gotten to play with John McLaughlin and
Yeah, sure.
Pat Martino. I toured with Pat for a year, and you know, John and Pat, and
Did you ever play with Jim Hall? Since you
I
mentioned him
did
before?
recorded with Jim Hall. Yes,
Really? Oh, wow.
I did a record. We recorded Sketches of Spain with Jim Hall,
Okay,
and I
find that.
recorded a
Okay.
record with Jim Hall and Chet Baker.
Wow. Really? Man, I have to find this one.
Just Chet Baker had passed, but it's with Jim Hall is on it, and Steve Gadd. It
Wow.
was a CTI record.
How was Jim like? I mean, amazing, right? To you guys.
Master.
Yeah, right.
Total master. And I think, you know, when I recorded with him, I was Dave Matthews, the piano player and arranger, is the one that produced that record. And, you know, Jim was used to playing with acoustic upright players. So even though he played with, I'm sure, Steve Swallow on electric bass, but I remember him telling me that he wanted, you know, I was playing fretless. He said he wanted it to sound as much like an upright as possible. And we recorded at Rudy Van Gelder's studio in Englewood. And wow, Rudy, I don't know what cue he used on it, but it sounds like an upright bass. You know, and you know, my head, my sensibilities, I come from really studying acoustic bass and playing acoustic bass, but I was a big fan of Paul Chambers, the bassist who played with Miles Davis and all the original, you know, records, and Scott Farrow and Charles Mingus and Dave Holland. I studied with Dave Holland on acoustic bass.
Oh, wow.
So I have an acoustic bass sensibility. And it's funny because a great Japanese bass player, Teru Masahino, no, Teru, I forgot his last name, but he was watching me. He was producing a record, and he was watching me play electric, and he says, "You're really an upright player." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you all the pull-offs and everything you're doing up, you know, around here, that's all upright stuff." And it is, because I really was really deeply into listening to all the upright players, you know. I love Eddie Gomez and Scott LaFaro, I mentioned, and
yeah,
a lot of the depth. And so it's interesting.
Oh, interesting. Wow, yeah. I didn't know. I have to find this record with Jim. I think I have so many of his records, but not this one, obviously. Okay. I'll try to search for it. Super.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mark, not to take too much of your time, I just wanted to ask you what's still in the schedule for you for this year, and some upcoming tours to promote the new album, or some upcoming projects still, and what's on the schedule?
Well, right now I'm in the midst of promoting my new record, the new record that just came out, Cross Currents. I'm going to be touring. Actually, I'm doing a project coming up April 1st with the drummer from The Doors, John Densmore.
Really? Wow.
It's with John and Adam Holtzman, who's a great keyboard player, play with Miles Davis, and Arjun Brugman, who's a fantastic percussionist, tabla player. We did a record together called Dreaming Spirits. And so it's going to be a quartet. Excuse me, it's going to be a trio. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, no, quartet. With those people, we're going to record some of the, I believe, maybe some of the Doors songs, but a very spacious version of it with similar grooves, but more ambient. And then I'm doing that, and then I'll be going to, as I mentioned earlier, on a tour with the Gil Evans tribute band, I guess I want to call it. We're going to be playing in Italy in July, in Lugano, Italy, and Lugano, Switzerland. And so I'm looking forward to that. And then I'll be doing dates this summer. I don't have any plans at the moment to tour with this band of the new record, Cross Currents, but I would like to.
Yeah.
So that's, I also play with the great jazz singer Michael Franks. And
okay.
I've recorded and played with Michael since the early 80s, and I toured with him last year and the year before, and we're going to be touring again this summer in August. So, excuse me, I'm looking forward to that a lot.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Mark, thanks so much for sharing some of these thoughts. Really appreciate it, and so nice to hear you talk.
Thank you. It's a pleasure speaking with you, and all the best with your music, and have a great tour.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll send you a link with this one with Bob and Arnold. I hope you like it. So.
Oh, thanks. Please, I look forward to it.
Yeah, and if you're in Europe, I hope to catch you. We'll have a glass of wine together or something. So.
I'd love to get together. I'd love to play with you. Yes.
Oh man, anytime. I have a studio. Come. Great. We have a guest room. You're invited. So.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks. Take care.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Yeah.